Are you thinking about becoming a mobile app developer? Well, in this video, we're going to talk about the different ways that you can earn an income as an app developer, the skills you'll need to build, as well as different options that you can take to become an app developer, as well as the pros and cons of each option. And lastly, we'll end off this video with actionable steps that you can take today to start down your journey of becoming a mobile app developer. Let's dive in. First of all, let's start with what mobile app developers do. They create mobile applications for most often Android and iOS. Now, oftentimes they focus on a single platform and you become an expert iOS developer or Android developer, but there are also mobile developers that specialize in cross-platform technologies like React Native or Xamarin, for example. Being able to do more than one technology is a great way to gain a competitive advantage in the job industry. But if you're just starting out, I would recommend choosing a single platform to focus on first. Now, as a mobile app developer, they could be working for a large corporation, a small business, for themselves as a freelancer, or even as an indie app developer trying to publish apps into the App Store or the Play Store and trying to earn a full-time living that way. Either way, if you love building apps, then this is definitely a career to consider. There are broadly 3 different paths you can take as a mobile app developer. Let's take a look at each one and dive a little deeper. Now, the first and most obvious path is to get a job with a company. Now, as a mobile app developer in a company, your job will be to either maintain their existing suite of apps or to build new apps. But either way, you're helping this company move forward in the app industry. Your tasks can range from building apps from scratch, building new features for existing apps, fixing bugs, testing, or if the business is really small, you might be doing all of these tasks. Another path that you can take as a mobile app developer is as a freelancer. Now, as an independent freelancer, you are meeting with clients, you are understanding their needs and their requirements, you are coming up with a plan, and you are delivering that app from start to finish. Once you become a proficient freelancer, you may be able to handle more than one client at once. The apps that you build will vary from client to client depending on what they need, as well as the income and the scope of the apps. The nice thing about freelancing is that once you build enough of a name for yourself and enough of a clientele, you may be able to hire your own developers and start building a consulting company that way. The third broad path is working as an indie app developer. This is where you're coming up with your own app ideas, you are building them, you are then marketing them, creating the business model for them, and publishing these apps in the App Store, hoping to get users and to make a living on your own through the App Store. Now, this is attractive for a lot of people because you don't have to answer to any clients, you don't have to answer to any bosses, and you get to implement your own cool ideas. But on the flip side, this is also the riskiest option because all the revenue hinges on your ability to come up with a solution that meets a need in the market, as well as to market it so that people know about it, and then for people to use it and want to continue using it and give you their money. Now, the great thing about all of these 3 options is that you don't have to only select one. There are people who are working full-time for a company, freelancing on the side, as well as building their own app ideas for the App Store on the side. You can be doing all 3 options at once. However, do keep in mind that some contracts that you have with your full-time employer may not allow you to do freelancing on the side. So obviously, you're going to have to make sure you're free and clear to do that. But usually, I don't see large companies putting clauses to prevent you from building apps on your own for fun and profit. Now that you know the 3 broad paths of a mobile app developer, let's talk about the different options you have to educate yourself and to learn the skills that you need to become one. So first off, in this day and age, there are so many options available for you to pursue this. It's not like in the past where you had to just go to school for computer science or computer engineering and learn this and then graduate and find a job. That is one path. That is the traditional path. And we're going to talk about that. But another path these days is that you can enroll in an online program such as our CWC Plus, where you can learn how to build iOS apps. Or you might be following YouTube videos and reading books and sort of learning on your own. So let's dive a little deeper into each of these options and talk about pros and cons. The first option is to teach yourself or being self-taught. The nice thing about this industry is that it doesn't discriminate. You don't need a degree in computer science to get a job. It all hinges on what you've done and what you can do. So self-teaching is totally viable. Now, the good thing about this option is that you can learn at your own pace. If you have a busy schedule, if you have demanding kids or whatever the case may be, you can learn in your free time. Also, there are a variety of mediums that suit different learning styles for this self-teaching path. You can do videos, you can do books, you can do online classes, courses, and things like that. There's so many different options. You find the format that you learn best in. Now, the pros with this method, I think we already mentioned a ton of them, is that you can sort of learn at your own pace, and there's a variety of formats available for your learning. And another pro is that typically these options are all, they don't cost as much as the other options that we're going to talk about. So this can be quite affordable. Now, the downside with self-teaching is that you may not have a guide or professional, someone to instantly tell you when you're going wrong, or to help you, break down some of those roadblocks that you're facing. And so you may end up wasting time going down the wrong path or getting stuck on something for a very long time. And also, don't forget that if you are not the disciplined type of person, this self-teaching method may not be good for you because it relies on your own motivation and discipline to make progress. The next option is to attend school or a university program for something like this. These days, universities offer mobile app development as a course that you can take. The nice thing about attending school for this is that you're going to have the assessments, you're going to have the deadlines, and there is a structure. It's delivered by a professional, hopefully, someone who knows what they're talking about, and all of the materials and the lessons, they're laid out in a clear path that gets you a result at the end. So I think that's the nice thing about courses and structured learning. Now, some of the pros of this is that you will have certification. Like you're going to have a diploma or a certificate or a degree, something that tells you, yes, you've completed these skills, you've been assessed, and you have these skills. Now, earlier I said that it doesn't really matter if you self-teach yourself when you're applying for jobs versus someone who graduated. But however, having that degree and coming from that program automatically does give a degree of confidence. I think still, I stand by what I said. Ultimately, it's going to depend on what you've done and what you can do. So I still think that demonstrated expertise is more important or has more weighting than where you graduated from or if you were self-taught. But if you do have that degree and that that program written on your resume, it does automatically let the reviewer know or the recruiter know that you have those skills. Or you should have those skills, I should say. Now, the cons. Enrolling in a university program or college program is costly. Like, that's the flip side of this. It's going to cost a lot of money, and many students go in debt just to go through these programs. Now, whether or not that is feasible for you, that's up for you to decide. Also, there may be other expenses if your university is far away and there are travel expenses, or you have to live abroad, for example. And if you already have a full-time job or you are a parent, it could be hard to make time for that sort of study. The third option is joining a coding bootcamp. Now, these boot camps are short and sweet. It's kind of like the summer camps that we all attended as kids and we enjoyed, hopefully. It's fun to be around people who are on the same journey as you, and you can learn off each other and figure things out together. Now, the pros to a coding bootcamp is that it's sort of in between the full-time university study versus the at your own pace self-teaching. It's sort of in between that. There still is a schedule. It could be like really intense for a short period of time, or it could be a couple of dedicated night classes per week, that sort of thing. So a pro for a coding bootcamp could be, if it fits your schedule and your budget, this could be a nice option to get started. It's got a little bit of that structure. It's got a little bit of that freedom of schedule. But it's also got that guidance that is completely missing from the self-teaching option. Now, in terms of cons for coding bootcamp, again, it really depends on your schedule. Even a few days a week could be too much commitment for you. And some bootcamps could still end up costing a lot of money. So make sure that you talk to people who have taken that bootcamp before, or read reviews about the bootcamp that you are thinking about joining. Don't just join up for any random one, because I think quality varies between different boot camps, and you definitely don't want to pay all of that money and spend all that time and still come away with nothing. All right, now that you know the different learning options to develop the skills that you need, what are the skills that you need? So broadly speaking, we talked about iOS app development and Android app development. I recommend you to choose either or when you're starting and not try to do both, because that could be very overwhelming. Now here at Code with Chris, we focus on iOS app development, whether you are a beginner or you're an intermediate learning to gain even more skills. We've helped thousands of people build their own apps or get jobs in the industry and things like that. So I'm going to speak a little bit about the skills you need if you wanted to go down the iOS app development path. If you want to go down the Android app development path, just search for it on Google or YouTube, and I'm sure you can find different videos to help you. Now, as for iOS app development, the programming language that you're going to want to learn is Swift. Now, this is a relatively new language compared to other programming languages, but that's actually a good thing because it's modern and it's easy to read and it's not archaic. It will be a fun experience to learn Swift. So Swift is the coding side where you express the logic for your app. For the UI side, which stands for user interface, this is the visual elements that the user sees when they're using your app. There are two different frameworks that you can use. One is called UI Kit, which is mostly the prevalent one right now. However, Apple has released Swift UI in the last few years, and this is sort of their modern take or upgrade, if you will, to UI Kit. And so while not as widely adopted right now as UI Kit, it will be in the future because that's the direction that Apple wants to move in. So if I were you and I was just starting out learning iOS app development, Swift is a given. You're going to have to learn that, but I would also focus on Swift UI. And lastly, there is Xcode, which is the application that runs on Mac. And this is sort of like the studio development environment where you write your code and you configure the UI piece. Essentially, that is the application where you use to build your apps. So you're going to have to learn your way around Xcode as well, but that sort of comes in time if you're just learning Swift and Swift UI. You're going to be using Xcode anyways to do those things. Now let's touch briefly on how much you can earn as a mobile app developer. Your salary is going to depend which of the three paths that you choose, the ones we mentioned earlier on. But again, you can sort of mix and do a variety of these three paths. If you're working for a company, the average salary would be about $100,000 a year. As a freelancer, your rates could be anywhere from $20, $50, $70 an hour. It really depends on what you're comfortable charging and what you feel like your skill and your time is worth. Professional consulting companies charge their clients upwards of $150 an hour for their consultants. But obviously, as an employee to a consulting company, you're not getting that amount. You're just getting a small portion of that. As your own freelancer, you get to keep all of it. But then you also have to manage the client and you have to find your own clients and do all of that stuff. Now, when it comes to indie app developers building their own apps, releasing it to the App Store and trying to make a revenue, it's really hard to say what their incomes can be because it's even hard enough to get an app that is successful in the App Store enough to earn any income. What I would say is search for some app case studies, successful case studies from other indie app developers, and a lot of them actually share their numbers and how fast or slow the growth of the app was. So immerse yourself in that space if you are thinking about doing it yourself, and I'm sure you can get an idea of how much you can earn. And as starting out, I would definitely recommend going down the path where you're looking for a job. You can always start freelancing and building your own apps on the side, and then once those things show enough promise, you can then quit your full-time job and pursue those things instead. All right, now we've arrived at how to get started with your own mobile app career, an actionable step-by-step plan to start down the journey of becoming a mobile app developer. Okay, step one is to get the basics. So we talked about the skills you need to learn depending on if you want to do iOS app development or Android app development. We talked about how to get those skills, whether you want to self-teach, do a boot camp, or do a university program. Step one is getting the skills. And this is kind of the hard part because you're going to have to put in the effort. You're going to have to make the time in your schedule to study and to practice. But if you stick with it, you will slowly learn the skills. This stuff is not rocket science. It's just how much time have you dedicated to learning it. So it's possible for anyone. Now, step 2 would be building a portfolio, because as I said, demonstrated expertise that you can show someone is more valuable than just, I've taken this course or I've taken this program, So I would focus on filling up your GitHub account or actually releasing apps in the App Store, something that you can show an interviewer that you have done and that you have built. And if you don't know what to build for your portfolio, perhaps you can take some of the projects that you've built in your course or your program and put that in your portfolio. Or you could ask your friends if they have anything that they'd like to build. Anything, again, you can put in your GitHub account or publish into the App Store to link to. Step 3 is to craft your resume. Now, in the beginning, if you are new to this industry, you obviously won't have a lot to put on your resume, but focus on those personal projects. Focus on that GitHub account. Focus on those apps that you've published. Anything that you can demonstrate that you have the skills and you can do what you say you can do, that is going to be a plus. And finally, step number 4 is to start applying for junior jobs. Now, when you do this, just understand that right now, as you're applying for jobs, this is the hardest part because you have no experience. All you have on your resume is your portfolio. However, all you need is for one person to give you a chance. That's it. So you're going to get 100 no's, but all you need is one yes. And as soon as you get that one yes, you get in there, you stay humble, you're there to learn, and you do a good job. That will then set you up for either a continued career growth at that company or an easier time to jump to another company later on when you have more experience. When you apply for jobs the second time, it's going to be easier. The third time, even easier, and so on and so forth as you mature in this app industry. Now, step 5 is just to stop watching this video and get started. If becoming an iOS app developer is something that you've always dreamed about, check out our playlist right there to get started for free. See if this is something for you. Thousands of people have taken this free 14-day app challenge and have really discovered that this is something that they want to do, as well as it's something that they can do. Building that confidence and unlocking those barriers in your head telling you that you can't do it, sometimes that is all that it takes to create a path that you never thought was possible. So go ahead, click there, watch it. Thanks for watching this video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now. In the previous video, I covered all the options for becoming an iOS developer, but in this video, I want to lay out a step-by-step plan for you to actually achieve it. So at a high level, the previous video covered the following options for becoming an iOS developer: self-teaching via course, attending a university or college program, or joining a bootcamp. And if I were to start all over from day one, I think I would choose to learn on my own. There are just so many good resources out there, including my own, where someone can just pick up this skill. So with the self-teaching option in mind, here's step 1 of how to become an iOS developer step by step. The first step to becoming an iOS developer begins before you even start learning, and it is to prepare yourself mentally. Now, don't underestimate the power of mindset because it drives your actions. If you start this journey with the wrong mindset, you will fail. So here are 3 things that I would do to have a successful mindset. Here's thing number 1. I remember when I first started teaching iOS back in 2013, and I noticed the pattern. Some people would learn iOS and go on to find jobs and launch apps in the store, while others would give up pretty early on. There were rarely people who would make it halfway and then call it quits. When I asked the quitters why they quit, it would always be something along the lines of, it was harder than I thought, or I didn't have time, or coding wasn't for me. Now, my issue with these reasons is that they're flimsy excuses for not achieving your goal and why you're quitting. An actual deal-breaking reason to quit would be something like, my Mac blew up and I can't use it anymore. Or I broke my finger, so I'm going to have to pause this for now. So this led me to draw this learning curve to help people visualize the journey of learning iOS development. I called it the hump. Terrible name, right? Comment below if you have a better name and I may adopt it. It starts off easy and you're enjoying yourself, but starts to ramp up in challenge and frustration. At this point, if you thought it was going to be a walk in the park to launch your own app, or that you learn the skills for a 6-figure job in a couple of months, you'll quit. I guarantee it. Because your expectation is so far from reality that when reality finally hits, it's a steep drop. But if you persist, work through the frustration and challenge and learn from your mistakes, you'll make progress, little by little. And then after a certain point, things will get easier and you will reach your goal. Here's the interesting thing though. The learning material and skills required, they do not get easier. In fact, they get more complex as you progress. But my observation is that people either quit here in the beginning or they reach their goal. So what gives? Why would the material be the most complex here, yet the difficulty is also the lowest here? The reason is because the graph doesn't measure objective difficulty of the material. It measures your perception of the difficulty of the material. And why is that more important? It comes back to mindset. Let me walk you through it. In the beginning, you're not sure if you can achieve your goal. It's starting to get harder and harder, and it's beginning to seem like reaching your goal is less and less likely. And that's when many people will give up, especially those who thought it was going to be easy. But you're different. You stick with it and you struggle a bit. Through little successes and small wins here and there, something begins to change in your mind. You start realizing that you can do it, and that's all it takes, really. Perceived difficulty starts going down as confidence in yourself rises, even though the material is getting more complex. So to sum it up, have realistic expectations about the time it'll take and the commitment it's going to require from you to gain these valuable iOS app development skills. You will encounter frustration, but it'll be worth it in the end. And this leads me to thing number 2. If you were learning a new skill, how long do you think it would take? Perhaps you've heard of the 10,000-hour rule for mastery in Malcolm Gladwell's book Outliers. But have you heard of another book by Josh Kaufman called The First 20 Hours? His research led him to believe that if you spend just 20 hours of deliberate practice on the right skills, you can get pretty good at whatever skill you're learning. Now, whether that's true or not, I'm not going to debate that, but it is the inspiration behind this strategy. And that's to open up your calendar and pencil in 20 one-hour sessions to learn iOS development. This way, you're going to prioritize it with the other things that are going on in your life. Plus, it gives you a short-term goal. More on why that's important a little later. Now, let me tell you a story. I turned 40 this year, and it's the first time in my life that I've been able to consistently get exercise. Why? Because I finally made room for it in my daily routine, and I prioritize it just as highly as everything else in my life. And now it's just a part of my day, and I don't have to give it a second thought. So don't try to learn iOS on top of everything else going on in your life. Make a routine spot on your calendar, preferably a quiet time where you can be undisturbed, and prioritize it. Finally, we come to thing number 3. We all have a reason to become an iOS developer. Oh, it's going to be great when I'm working at Apple and making hundreds of thousands of dollars each year. Or, I can just imagine my app going viral and making millions from the App Store. The problem is that it's a long, long journey. And when you're struggling, in pain, tired, you want to quit, you can feel like you'll never reach that end result. You might as well quit now and watch some Netflix, right? This might help. Set 2 goals instead of just having one. The long-term goal, this is the initial reason that caused you to embark on this journey. And also have a short-term input-based goal. This could be a goal of doing 20 one-hour sessions before even thinking of quitting. Or maybe you'll commit to learning for at least 2 months before considering quitting. The important thing is that it is near-term and it's input-based, meaning that it's within your control because you can control how much time and effort you input. So thing number 3 is to have 2 goals. The long-term goal, which reminds you of why you're on this journey, but the short-term goal helps you keep making progress bit by bit. Do you notice that all 3 mindset strategies are to prevent you from quitting prematurely? And sometimes that's all it takes. If you just persist a little bit longer past the frustration, there's a high chance that you'll succeed. Okay, next, step number 2 is very important because guess what? There's a ton of stuff you don't need to learn in iOS development and you can still reach your goal. You can dramatically reduce the time it takes to reach your goal by selectively choosing only the specific skills you need, and it all depends on what your goal is. And that's what I'm going to break down for you in step 2, and it's in the next video, so make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss it. In the meantime, please comment below which is your favorite mindset strategy. Number 1, having realistic expectations. Number 2, penciling in the sessions on your calendar. Or number 3, having 2 goals instead of just 1. All right, thanks for watching, and we're going to continue this how to become an iOS developer step by step in the next video. I'll see you there. In the last video, you learned how to set your expectations and prepare your mindset for success. Now we're going to go over exactly what skills you need to learn so you can be as efficient as possible. For example, if your goal is to learn how to play chess so that you can play with your 10-year-old, you're not going to go and study the Grandmaster Preparation series, right? Same thing goes for iOS app development. The problem is that sometimes it can be hard to tell what you need to know and what you don't need to know, especially as a beginner. So let me lay out a learning roadmap for you depending on your goal. Now, obviously I can't read your mind, but in my 10 years of teaching iOS app development, most people's goals have fallen into these two categories. You want to become an iOS developer so that you can find a job in the field, or you want to become an iOS developer so that you can build your own apps and make money. For simplicity, let's call this path professional and this path indie. And they have different required skills and learning paths. Just to go over a few more goals that I've heard, you want to build apps as a hobby, you want to build an app for your business, or you want to build an app for work. For these options, they're similar to the indie path, so let's put them there. Between the professional and indie paths, there are three main differences: the required technical skills, teamwork, and tools. Okay, let's start with the required technical skills. As a professional iOS developer, the required technical skills are different from that of the indie path because you will be most likely working in a team environment at the workplace. Now, I know that's not always true because there's a chance you might be hired as the only iOS developer in the company, but I wouldn't recommend a job like that as your first iOS job. We'll talk about that later in this series when we get to the point of applying to jobs. For now, let's say that you're joining an established developer team as a junior iOS developer. Imagine a soccer or football team. There are different positions. You train for a specific position and you get hired for that position. Now, you can rely on your other teammates for the other positions, and your team also counts on you to be good at your own position. When it comes to apps, there are a few positions to play: product manager, designer, mobile developer, backend developer, tester, data scientist, and marketer. But because you're on a team, your role will be as an iOS developer. And if you're curious about what the other roles do, we're going to talk about that later in this video. So here are the basic skills that you need to know as an iOS developer. At the most basic level, you need to know how to use Xcode, how to write Swift code, how to build user interfaces, and how to debug and troubleshoot your code. Going up from that, at the intermediate level, you should understand concurrency in iOS, how to save data locally with core data, and experience with various Apple and third-party frameworks. Next, you need to know how to write test cases and do unit testing, and finally, deployment. Now, moving up from that, at the advanced level, you should know your software design patterns and your algorithms. You should know how to measure performance of algorithms using Big O notation and how to measure the performance of your apps using Xcode instruments. Now, all of these skills at the advanced level is related to writing great code instead of just code that works. And just as a caveat, there are some additional skills for teamwork, just in case you're wondering, but that's going to be revealed later in this video. So that's roughly what you need to know as a professional iOS developer. But don't get me wrong, every day on the job, you will be learning new techniques and new skills and also making mistakes and learning from those mistakes. It's just part of the job. As a developer, the learning never stops. Next, let's take a look at some of the skills that you need if you're going to be building apps yourself. Now let's take a look at this football team diagram again. As a solo developer, you're going to be doing all of it. Wait. Don't panic. The scale of the app that you can build is actually much smaller. And that means although you need to learn skills in multiple areas, you only need to scratch the surface in each area. And these days, you can find a YouTube video to learn almost anything. Let's expand these roles a little bit and see what they do. As a product manager, since it's your own product, you'll have to figure out what type of app you want to build and what features you want to add. Learn some market research skills to find a need for your app. The other thing you have to do yourself is to manage the project. Learn how to set your own deadlines and to keep yourself accountable. It's easier than it sounds, especially when you don't have a boss. As a designer, you either roll your own design to the best of your abilities, you pick up some design skills, or you can pay someone else for the design work. The good thing is that Apple has human interface guidelines that outline best practices for design and usability. If you follow that, you'll be in pretty good shape. As a mobile developer, the technical skills we covered on the professional side still largely applies here, but you only need to know what pertains to your own app idea. For example, if your app doesn't use core data, just don't learn it. Also, the level 3 advanced skills won't be as important if your app is small. The impact of bad performing code won't be as noticeable here. As a backend developer, if your app requires a backend or database, you'll have to find out how to do that. But luckily, there are tools that we can leverage such as Firebase, which helps out in this regard. As a quality assurance tester on a small app, you might be able to get away with just informally testing your app, but it'll still be helpful to learn how to write test cases and to do unit testing. As a data scientist, since it's your own product, you'll have to analyze your data, draw conclusions from it and decide what to do next. And then finally, as a marketer, you'll have to learn how to market your own app and to do app store optimization. Now, it seems like a lot to learn, but as an indie app developer, you get to learn the process from start to finish, and you get to reap all the rewards because it's your own app. And best of all, if your app gains traction and you build a user base, you can also consider selling the app. Keep in mind that your first app may not be a success, but I bet your 10th app will see some money. The other thing to consider is that although you have to learn all of these extra skills, you don't need to go through the job application process and interview process. So to sum it up, a professional goes deep into the technical skills. You have to be really good at what you do, and you have to rely on your other teammates for the other roles. And as an indie developer, you go wide instead, and you have to cover all the bases, all of the different roles, but you don't have to go as deep into each of them. Let's move on to the next set of skills required, teamwork. In a professional environment, there's a lot of teamwork and formality required. You need to know how to work together with other developers and other departments, such as interacting with design and quality assurance, being good at communication, raising flags, and setting expectations with your team members, which leads to being a team player. Documenting your code so that other people can follow what you're writing, following a style guide so that the code is consistent across the project. And then also, less talked about skill is being humble, being open to feedback and criticism, and also asking for help when you need it. These soft skills are hard to learn on your own without actually doing it, so you'll just have to practice on the job once you get hired. As an indie, there's not much requirement for teamwork since you'll be doing everything yourself. Out of this list, I'd say that as an indie, it's still important to document your code properly and to maintain a consistent coding style across your project, and to learn how to work with a designer if you're going to be outsourcing that function. Let's move on to the third set of skills, tools. As a professional, there are a lot of industry standard tools and processes that you'll need to learn. Things such as source control, using it to branch and merge code, resolving code conflicts between team members, and also continuous integration and deployment. Those are the two big things that come into mind. As an indie, you can use whatever tools that you want. Here are some that might be useful to you. GitHub for source control, Figma for design, Firebase platform for backend and analytics features, Bitrise for continuous integration, RevenueCat for monetization, AppFollow for marketing research, Trello for project management, and Proxyman to debug web traffic. Ultimately, regardless of which path, professional or indie, tools are not that important because they're very easy to pick up and to learn. We've covered a lot in this video, so I had to create a map of the required skills for the two paths. You can download this as a PDF. The link is under the video. I've also starred the skills that I think are crucial for success. Now that you know which skills you need to learn depending on your goal, the next step is to find the learning resources to acquire these skills. That is in step 3 in the next video. If you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss it. And in the meantime, I want you to comment below and let me know, what is your goal for learning iOS app development? Is it to break into the industry and find a job, or is it to build your own apps? All right, thanks for watching. Don't forget to leave the comment. I'll see you in the next video. In the last video, we mapped out the skills that you need for two different goals. Number 1, becoming an iOS developer to find a job. And number 2, becoming an iOS developer to build your own apps. I even made a downloadable PDF for you with the skill trees. Now we need to talk about finding the right resources to learn these skills. So, where do you find the proper learning resources? Well, the answer has two parts. Number 1, where do you find the learning resources? This is the easy part. Number 2, and this is the hard part, how do you judge if it's right for you? And for this, I have 7 criteria to look for. But before we dive into that, let's cover the easy part first. Where do you find these resources? And this depends on what is the best mode of learning for you. If you like in-person learning, look for some in-person classes or an in-person course in your city. If you like reading, search on Google for your topic or go to the library. If you like video, search on YouTube. Now, if you're doing in-person learning, I'm sure the quality is going to be there and the training is going to be up to date. And more importantly, the concepts taught are going to be taught in the right order and progression so that you build up your skills. Same thing with a book. The only thing I'd check is the publication date, because technology changes so fast, you'll want to make sure the book was published within the last 12 months, ideally. Now, if instead you found an article on Google or a video on YouTube, then I'd suggest running through the following 7 criteria. Number 1, is it for beginners? If you are a beginner, then I would recommend that you search for an article or video that has the term for beginners, starting from scratch or something like that. The reason is because these learning resources will focus on using less technical jargon and explain things at a slower pace. Number 2, what does the resource cover? If it's your first time learning about a topic, then your goal should be to find a resource that gives you an overview of the topic before deep diving into anything specific. For example, if you're learning Xcode and you find an article on all the features and things that you can do with the editor area, that's not very helpful if you don't even know what the editor area is. Ideally, you're looking for an overview of Xcode before even getting into the details. Number 3, is it up to date or is it still relevant? It's extremely tough to learn from an outdated resource because as you're trying to follow along, you're going to hit road bumps and you may not be able to follow along at all. And this just adds to the frustration of learning. So how do you determine if the resource is up to date? First of all, you need to find out what is the latest version of Xcode or Swift or whatever the topic is that you're trying to learn. And that can be done with a quick Google search. Number 2, does the resource have some sort of indication about what version it's compatible for? If not, then you may want to consider leaving a comment or checking the comments or messaging the author to see if there's any information you can find out. You can ask the author, does this resource still work for this latest version of that topic? Now, one thing to keep in mind is that things may not have changed that much in the latest version compared to the previous version, so a good quality learning resource may still be a great resource for you to learn on. For this, I would check the comments of the article or video and see if people are still using this to learn today. Number 4, is it a series? Now this is a bonus. I love the series format because it breaks down a bigger topic into bite-sized lessons. And what's more is that each lesson can build upon the last, and it allows the student or the viewer to feel progression in skills. Now again, this is a bonus if your learning resource is broken up into a series of articles or videos, but it's not an absolute requirement. Number 5, does it have a table of contents? Again, this is a bonus and it's very easy and quick to see. If there is a table of contents, that means that the author has given some thought into the order in which the ideas should be presented in. And I think that is an easy way to tell if it's a quality resource or not. It is not a red flag if it's missing. Again, it's just a bonus if it is there. Number 6, does it have some steps to follow along or something to practice on? So for example, if there are steps that you can see in the learning resource, then that is something that you can try to replicate on your own computer and try to follow along. And this is super duper important because I don't know how long you've been following, but my story in learning iOS is that I failed for the first time simply because I did not do enough practicing as I was learning. I read a book from cover to cover, thought I knew everything, I understood everything, but when I sat down to try to build an app, I realized that I didn't know how to start, and I kind of had to start all over in my learning process. So that's why I highly recommend that you follow along and practice and make this a very big component of your learning journey. And this leads me to my 7th criteria, which is more of a learning tip for you actually. And that is to let your practice guide you in your learning. What do I mean by that? It means that when you find a learning resource, treat it as a starting point, right? Follow along and practice it. As you practice, the beautiful thing is that questions will come up. You're going to discover what you don't know. And you're going to have questions pop up in your head. What about this? What about that? That the learning resource may not have covered. So let those questions guide you in searching for the answers to those questions. And that is a great way to explore and learn a topic. I guess another way to phrase this tip is that the learning resource that you initially find, it doesn't need to be super comprehensive and cover everything about that topic. In fact, it might be kind of hard to find a learning resource that does that. You'll probably take several learning resources to fully cover the topic. And the important thing is that you find a good starting point, right? You start practicing it so that you generate those questions and you find out what you don't know. And then you let those questions guide you in searching for answers, right? And that is also a very practical way to learn. So when we create training material here at Code with Chris, our video courses or series, we always try to keep these things in mind. Even this How to Become an iOS Developer series that you're watching right now is an example of that. These days, there are so many different learning resources out there that are completely free. If you really want to achieve your goal, the only thing standing in front of you is yourself and putting in some hard work. So remember from the first video in this series, the 20-hour rule. So go ahead, use these tips to find a learning resource, judge if it's the right one for you, and pencil in 20 one-hour sessions into your calendar. Before you know it, you'll get the ball rolling, you'll start making progress, and things will start looking very, very positive. Now, in the next step in this series of how to become an iOS developer, I'm going to tell you how you can judge when you are ready to start applying for jobs, building your own app, and what are the steps that you can prepare to ensure success. All right, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Hello, it's Chris here, and welcome back to the How to Become an iOS Developer series. Now, if you've missed the last few videos, I'll link to them in the description. This is video number 4, and we're going to talk about how to get a job in the iOS industry. And to be honest, I've been out of the job industry for a long time. That's why I had to collaborate with someone who is in the thick of it. You might remember Ali, who was an intern with us a few years ago. Well, he's graduating now, and he already secured a job at a company whose core product is an app with over 16 million monthly active users. Now, this isn't luck that he landed this job. When he shared his job hunting process with me, I was surprised at how meticulous it was, with details such as which resume formats to use, how to bypass the popular job sites and go straight into the box of the recruiter, what technical skills to study for, and how to behave in interviews, among many more tips. Now in this video, I want to share some of those practical tips with you. Let's dive right in. So there are 5 major areas to landing the job. Here's what they are, here's the order you should do them in, and I'll tell you why in just a second. So number 1 is resume development, then online presence, applications, technical skills, and soft skills. All right, so why this specific order? Well, that's because this journey is intended to be taken after graduating from our Launch Your First App program. You don't have to go through our specific program, but before you get to this career stuff, you should have the foundational iOS skills and you should have a few projects under your belt so that there's something to put on your resume. That's why we can start with resume development and online presence. Now, another question is, why would we start applying to jobs before making sure that we have solid technical and soft skills? In reality, the application process takes a long time, and you might be applying to many positions before even landing an interview. So the timeline really looks like this, where you're applying to jobs while studying for technical questions and working on your soft skills. Now that you know what the 5 areas are, let's dive a little deeper into each area, starting with resume development. Now let's start with format and structure. Some people do 2-column resumes, some people do a single column. Some people do multiple pages, whereas some people condense everything into a single page. And then don't even get started on colors and fonts. So what is best? Well, first you have to understand that recruiters can get hundreds of resumes. So they actually use an automated resume screening software to sift through and filter out candidates to a more manageable number. Your first task is to make sure your resume is legible to a computer. If you use fancy formatting, your application might not even make it through the screening process. Regarding colors, color theory states that certain colors convey different moods. For example, red is often associated with being bold and yellow is seen as bright and happy. These are all things to consider, and that's why structure and formatting is important. Next, let's talk about experience points development. This is the work experience, your personal projects, the meat of your resume. Obviously, you want to have as much relevant experience as possible, but if this is your very first job, then you should have relevant personal projects that you've worked on. Furthermore, you should write your points in this format as much as possible. The what, how, why, and impact method. Here's an example. Developed a, using, to allow, leading to. Now let's fill it in. Developed a service using Python and AWS to allow for the automated syncing of production databases, leading to a less than 1% discrepancy in databases. Now, you may not know the impact of your work all the time, but wherever you can, use hard numbers and facts and stats. That makes your experience more impactful. But, I also have to caution against embellishing too much, because you need to be able to talk about each point in great detail during the interview. So make sure what you're writing is absolutely true and that you can back it up. Next, let's talk about online presence. At a minimum, you should have a LinkedIn and GitHub profile. For your LinkedIn, fill it out as thoroughly as possible and get recommendations from coworkers and friends. For GitHub, you'll want to put your personal projects on there, but make sure the code is well documented and that the project is organized. Otherwise, this could backfire on you. And as for personal websites with a resume/portfolio, this is a nice to have where you can show off your projects and resume, but it's not absolutely necessary. If this is something you want to do, think about using a website builder to quickly set one up, such as Wix or, all the usual suspects. But there's one I discovered recently, which is pretty easy to set up a one-pager. It's called card.co, and it's spelled oddly, CARRD.co. Okay, now let's talk about applications. Aside from using the big job sites like Indeed and Monster that might have many applicants going after the same job postings, you can also apply directly on a company's website. And even better, if there are particular companies you really want to work for, you can use a bunch of different techniques to find the email addresses of the head recruiter and email them directly. And there are techniques and strategies to this. Once you start getting replies from recruiters, you want to make sure that you're responding in a way that doesn't raise any red flags. So these are things like responding promptly, using professional language, not saying anything weird, and then also knowing when to follow up and what to say. I think this is mostly common sense, but I've learned not to assume anything. Now, this last area isn't something that I even realized that you have to do, but I guess you have to apply to so many different jobs these days just to land a few interviews. You need a way to track the status of each of your applications because you're going to be sending off many. You need to see which ones need following up on, which ones are dead ends, and so on. Tracking also gives you confidence because you'll begin to see patterns in numbers. Like on average, you get 1 interview, 7 rejections, and 22 no answers for every 30 applications you send. Now, I'm just making those numbers up, but once you see it that way, then it takes the emotion out of it and you know it's just a numbers game. You know it's just a matter of time if you keep at it. All right, let's move on to technical skills. Now, there are iOS specific skills that you need to know. These were covered in previous steps in the video series, but there are also more general computer science, software engineering type of skills you need, such as algorithms and data structures. These concepts are essential to software development, and there are websites you can use to study this stuff. Just search for algorithms and data structures on Google and YouTube. There are tons of videos covering these. The interviewer may also ask you some technical trivia. These are general knowledge questions such as, what's the difference between a git fetch and a git pull? Now, luckily, again, there are websites with lists of these types of questions that you can study. And then lastly, this is the most scary part, the live coding / problem solving part. For this, the interviewer wants to see you code or reason out the solution to a problem. Again, there's a pool of common problems and solutions that you can study and practice on websites such as LeetCode and HackerRank. Now, the last part, soft skills. This is so important because if you are not good at this part, you might not even get through the first phase of the interview. Let's start with project background and explanation. This is very important because it usually happens even before the technical interview. The interviewer may pick apart your resume asking specific questions about your work experience. And if you can't answer confidently and in detail, it might raise some red flags as to whether or not you actually did those things. What is a lie? What is truth? If you give the interviewer any doubt, you're out the door. So know your resume points inside and out. Next, behavioral questions. These are lists of common behavior questions that you can study from websites. These are things that look at how you would act in various difficult scenarios. It also gives the interviewer a sense of whether or not you'll fit into their team culture. And then there's general communication. This part talks about how to conduct yourself during an interview because communication isn't just verbal. There's a huge nonverbal component such as how you look, how you smell, how you carry yourself, how you greet someone, how you respond under stress and things like that. So if this stuff doesn't come natural to you, definitely look it up, study it, practice it. Now, if you want to dive deeper and you want to actually put into practice the things that we talked about in this video, you should definitely check out our Land Your First iOS Job program. My friend Ali and I put together this curriculum specifically to help people get job ready, and that means crafting a strong resume, knowing how to apply to jobs, and being confident in interviews. On this page, which I'll leave a link to in the description below, you can watch the trailer to see what you're going to gain by taking this program, and you're going to see what skills and what things you're going to be able to accomplish by going through this program. And there's also a curriculum that you can check out in further detail. Now, if that sounds interesting to you, check out the link to this page in the description below. And if you're serious about getting job ready and you want to join the program, I'll leave a limited time discounted offer in the description below as well, so that you can join at a reduced price. All right, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.